Welcome to episode 17 of Practicing Catholic Medicine. Today, I'm talking with me. It's your host, Catie Senour, and I'm going to be talking about my new Substack series, Are We Sacrificing Our Kids on the Altar of Elite Sport? And we're going to be looking at all three parts of that series, the gamble, the risk, and the reward. And I'm really excited to have you here and to share more. Let's jump in. This is Practicing Catholic Medicine, a podcast dedicated to developing community, encouraging conversation, and discussing top-notch medical care that respects the dignity of all of our patients. I'm your host, Catie, and I'm a physician assistant. I interview Catholics working in healthcare and invite them to share the challenges, joys, and all the in-betweens of being practicing Catholics, practicing medicine. Pull up a chair and join in the conversation. I'm thrilled to have you here. So welcome back, everyone. Like I said, the guest today is me. I'm going to be talking about, not interviewing myself, but I'm going to be talking about my new Substack series that I came out with called Are We Sacrificing Our Kids at the Altar of Elite Sports? And this was the series that I've been wanting to write for a long time, and I was really excited to be able to finally put it all together and out there. So we're looking at the medical literature as well as looking at this from the lens of our Catholic faith. And I found this to be kind of particularly timely, as Pope Leo's intention for the month of June when I released the series was for the value of sport. And quoting him here from his video message, he prayed that sports may be an instrument of peace, encounter, and dialogue between cultures and peoples, and that it may promote values such as respect, solidarity, and personal growth. And I fully believe that sports at their best can absolutely do this. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's praying for this. I think that sports are an incredible way to bridge cultures, an incredible way to call us to be better than we ever thought possible as an individual. The youth sports landscape, though, has kind of changed over the years, especially in America. I'd be curious to hear what it's like elsewhere in other countries. And there's been this increased emphasis on elite youth sport and early sport specialization. And I particularly care about this because I was a collegiate athlete. In high school, I went to state a couple of times in track, and then I went on and ran in college as a scholarship athlete, became captain of my team. And I promise I'm not sitting here living in the past, just giving some background. I'm a big fan of sports at high levels. And after that, I became a varsity Catholic missionary, which for those who aren't familiar, that's kind of like the athlete branch of the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, a focus. So my mission was serving collegiate athletes, so athletes who have worked really hard to get to a really kind of the pinnacle of their sport. And I was able to serve them in mission on their campus. Loved it. Some really great years of my life and met some really lovely ladies who I'm still very good friends with even to this day. And now in my role as a pediatric PI, I started seeing, all the way back to when I was a student and I was doing like orthopedic pediatric rotations, I was seeing these overuse injuries in kiddos who had, doing like 10, 20, 30 hours a week on one single sport year round. And I was just like, is this the new norm? We're seeing a lot of injuries. Like, this doesn't seem to be a healthy thing. And I continue to see more injuries in clinic. And I was just curious, like, is this just a fluke? Is this what everyone else is seeing in the country? And I got concerned for the health of children as well as just kind of like their long-term outcome. And then I'm also kind of looking at like all these families who are making sport their idol in a sense. And I don't want to say that so bluntly, like in terms of passing judgment, but I'm saying that in the sense of like, it seems like it could be really easy to make an idol out of sports if that's where you are every single day, every week, missing Sunday Mass, missing your Sunday Mass obligation, missing church, missing your church community for sport. And again, we're going to dive into this. I don't want to immediately be like, and you're all damned. Like, I don't believe that at all. And I know the church grants Mass exemptions. We there's a lot of room here to be able to have dialogue about this. And I will talk about that more. But I just wanted to kind of bring this up to you kind of to see what's going to be coming. And so we're looking at the evidence, we're looking at church teaching, and we're going to be kind of dividing this into 3 separate parts. So the first part, we're going to look at the problem, or is it a problem? I guess you could argue. We're going to just be looking at what our current landscape is in America with youth sports, the financial gains to be had, not so much for those of us who have children in the sport, but more for those who are backing youth sports, of which there's been some private equity and investment firms interested. No kidding. It's a huge market. And then part 2, we're going to be looking more into the risks. So there's some really good data unfortunately, on higher levels of injury, abuse, and burnout within the elite sport and early sport specialization market in pediatrics. And then we're going to go a little bit further and talk about the risks to our faith life, like potentially what we could see as I discussed. And then we're going into part 3. And part 3 is where we look at the reward ? Because I started this series, I guess maybe a little biased towards not having these like big elite youth sports, but I really was more just looking from like a curiosity standpoint. What does the evidence say? I wasn't planning on writing a 3-part series. I was planning on like jotting down a quick 1,000 words, calling it good, moving on. But the evidence I saw was just so impressive kind of negatively that I was like, we have to share this. I needed to make sure that people were aware of what the data was saying. And this is going to be a massive spoiler, but I'm sure you saw it coming. Elite youth sports and sports specialization early don't lead to the outcomes that we want if we're looking for having the goal of having D1 athletes, pro athletes, if we're looking to have kiddos who can play sport for a long time, if we're looking for kiddos to stay healthy and enjoy their sports. The data isn't great. And I want to allow room, and I do allow room for some nuance. So the data I'm giving and the way that we're going to talk about it today, if this is what you've chosen for your child, or it's what you think that you will want to choose, or it's what you yourself have done when you were younger, there's plenty of room for this to be a totally appropriate path. And I don't want to shut the door or say no one should ever do elite youth sports. No one should ever specialize early, because that's simply not the case, right? Like, we're all going to have different discernment for everything. And so I'm giving plenty of room for that while also kind of discussing some alternatives, and just speaking more on Pope Leo's message regarding sport and the good that sport can bring. We're ending on a really positive note, because ultimately I love sport. I think there's so much, so much good to be said about the values that sports bring for our children, for us as grown-ups. And so we're going to be talking about all of that today. I'm really excited to share. Let's jump in. We're going to start right away with part 1. So this is part 1, the gamble. So I was recently at a rec league basketball game for my daughter, and I surprised myself at how much I struggled not to coach from the stands. She was having an absolute blast. Meanwhile, I was just like watching these WNBA dreams that I had for her just dissolve into the ether. And I had no real reason to think that she would be a basketball superstar. Like, there's not a history of this in our family. My basketball career ended at middle school. I played middle school basketball for 2 years. I made a single basket in 2 years in a game. And my career ended there. Though you could argue that I had the perseverance of an elite athlete, it certainly wasn't going to be basketball. My daughter's team was rec league, like I said. Like, 2 girls on the team had the same number jerseys. I don't know why. I think they just made an accident. So they both had the same number. And trips to the drinking fountain and after practice snacks were just as important as winning the game to the girls. The final game was canceled because why not? Just cancel it. And I'd say, like, overall, my husband and I have been pretty successfully intentional about not signing our kids up into the big, intense youth group leagues that are really rampant about the suburbs that we live in. But I'd say it's getting harder as my children get older. And it was really easy to ignore the pressure when they were young, especially like when my oldest was an infant and I was like, well, she can't walk yet. I mean, that's a great excuse for not signing your kid up into like the elite soccer league. And we're also still in some really beautiful ways insulated by our Catholic community and our family out here. Because for the most part, I'd say our community is on similar pages as us, that our kids are in this kind of more of the rec league, fun, multiple sports, but like not overworking ourselves kind of thing. And I will say, though, I know as my kids age, and perhaps if they do find some level of success in sport, that this is going to keep getting harder. And those decisions aren't going to be as clear, too. I want to start off, though, by saying I love sports. I love playing sports. I love watching sports. And I love cheering my kids on in sports. And I was a child of the 90s, and I lived in a very rural area. And I played all the sports that the community education book had to offer. Do you remember that catalog that came out and it would just have like all the sports listed? My parents didn't have us do club teams because we were busy, and they didn't want to spend all of our time and our money just so I could be somewhat mediocre at softball as it was. I was already very mediocre at softball, who needed to throw more money at that. I did go on to do like an overnight tennis camp at a local college. I loved getting to play tennis all day, every day. It was so fun. And then eventually I would be first singles on the high school tennis team. So I found some success there. And I did do private lessons for a little bit, but that was, those were few and far between. I really just got better by playing with my friends over the summer. We'd go to the courts every single day and just play for hours, and we had so much fun. And then in the spring, I hurdled on the track and field team, but really I did that just to stay in shape for tennis and because I liked seeing my friends. I was a middle and high school girl. I just wanted to see my friends. Shocking everyone, including myself, though, suddenly my junior year, I was fast and I went to state, and then I went to state again my senior year. The college recruitment letters came in, and in the end, I chose an NCAA Division II school that offered a scholarship and also had great competition, while I got to stay in a city that I loved and the programs that I wanted. And then after college, like I said, I joined Focus, became a varsity Catholic missionary. And grown up me now, I still work out almost every day. One, because it's fun for me, and two, any overstimulated mom understands that working out and going out for runs helps us not burn the whole place down. So I'm still a huge fan. I still dabble in local races. I love to run 5Ks, sometimes 10Ks, half marathons. I usually am aiming for like a PR or to place in my age group. Although this last race that I did was a 10K up in Boulder, and I did drink a beer like mile 3 that was given to me by a nice man on the curb that was just cheering for all the runners, and it was delicious, and it was cold, which is really impressive to do when you're handing out beer from a curb. So we usually aim for PRs, but sometimes we're going for a party face, and that's the balance I like to strike. I wrote this article while my daughter was at a tennis camp for summer. So the benefits of sport for children are incredible, and I'm a huge fan. We get to have friends, teammates, the chance to work with people that are raised in different cultures than you, that might look different than you, that might act different than you. You can learn how to be brave. You learn leadership skills. 94% of women in C-suite positions were in a sport or played a sport at some point. There's the benefits are endless. And the church has also spoken on the good of sport, especially for young people. And I'll link to an article in the podcast show notes too that talks about the church's elaborating on the good of sport. And then, as we discussed, Pope Leo, his intention this month is for the value of sport. Not every kid is going to be a standout basketball player. I made one basket, and not every kid wants to be a standout basketball player, though I will say I did. I thought that their jerseys and the like sweatshirts that the team all got were super cool, so I was really hoping for that. And I will say, like, too, as a pediatric PA, I care for kids across the sports spectrum. Those who never raise their heart rate above resting to kids competing at really incredible elite levels and who go on to do really incredible things. And from a health standpoint, I'm always telling patients and frequently encouraging adolescents to find ways to move their body in ways that feel good for them. I'm such a big fan of all the creative ways kids find to be active. I mean, from jujitsu to fencing to taekwondo, walking their dog, jumping on the trampoline, rollerblading. Like, there's so many different ways to stay active. That's fun. That's not just like, hey, I need you to go run 5 miles right now. I know that liking to run makes me weird. Like, I recognize that this is not for everyone. But we all benefit from moving our bodies, right? So physical exercise strengthens our bones, our muscles, our heart, improves our mood, it decreases our risk for chronic disease. The mental health studies for sports are incredible, and I really think that this needs to be sung from the rooftops at a time when pediatric depression and anxiety are just skyrocketing. And the really cool thing that I found is that, yes, we know increased physical activity improves mental health, but that stays true even at high levels of performance. So even NCAA D1 college athletes reported that they had improved mental health compared to their non-athlete peers. Anyone who was born in a year that starts with 19 blank blank, ye old 1900s, will probably have felt this rapid kind of rise in early sports specialization and in elite youth sports compared to kind of the podunk sport leagues that we grew up with. And by some accounts, there has been a 70% increase in kids specializing in sports by age 13. And sometimes the ways that I hear parents talk about their kids in sports sounds a whole lot like gambling. And I really can't blame them. It really is like, if I bet $20,000 over the course of my child's adolescence on training camps and high-level teams and private coaches, what are the odds that they get a full ride? Us fun millennial parents, we grew up and were flooded under the housing market crash. And then we were left to either enter a workforce with very few jobs, or we were in high school or early college and we just kind of watched what college savings our parents may have set away from us just dwindle away. A college degree is outlandishly, disgustingly expensive these days. And if a parent could give their child a leg up on life to graduate with little or no debt, would they not be interested in that option? And add in name, image, and likeness deals, and your child could actually do pretty well financially in college as an athlete. So my question isn't so much like if elite youth sports are right or wrong. What I'm wondering more is, do elite sports and early sports specialization actually help us reach the goals of the parents and the kiddos? And what are those goals? Are we letting our kids play a sport they love at an elite level to fine-tune skills and improve long-term performance? Or are we just gambling with their bodies, or both? And if they don't get a scholarship going D1 or D2, if they don't get an NIL deal, if they don't go pro, if they get hurt their senior year of high school, was it all worth it? I know a lot of people who would say emphatically, yes, it was still worth it. Elite youth sports have benefits outside of just a college scholarship. So competitive sports challenge kids to be their very best and become mentally tough. There's the opportunity to form solid community among team families, to travel the nation. And sometimes the only ways that kids can continue on in sports is specializing early and playing in the quote unquote right leagues. And depending on local offerings, there might not be access to rec league sports or opportunities for children to play unstructured sports in the neighborhood. And we are in a different era than generations past. And it's one where kids really can't run freely without CPS being called. And I say this as, like, last summer, my daughter was playing outside on our front lawn as I watched from the window, and a concerned neighbor knocked on my door, very concerned that she was playing alone. It was, like I said, our front lawn, and I was there. And in the metro area where I live, there's elementary feeder programs for the public high school teams, and it breaks my heart to know that to be on a school ball team as a freshman, a child better had played with the $5,000 a year team that travels before a kiddo knows how to even tie their cleats. With these rising costs, equity and access to sports differs across gender, across race, geography, and ultimately the fees of these competitive teams are shutting out entry to sports for a lot of kids. Speaking of finances, adults kind of ruin everything fun, don't they? There's a lot of talk about big pharma, and I'm sure that those of you in healthcare are hearing a lot of that lately. But what about big youth sports? There was a really insightful article from the New York Times that I will link in the show notes below that detailed a myriad of investment groups and private equity firms that are chomping at the youth sports bit. Retailers like Dick's Sporting Goods and others are buying into the youth sports clubs as investments, which makes total sense considering that the youth sports market generates $40 billion annually. American parents spent 49% more in 2024 compared to 2019 on their child's primary sport, up to an average of more than $1,000 annually, which is twice the rate of inflation during that same time period. The costs increase with age, and families spend nearly $2,000 a year on the child's primary sport in their teenage years. And that may sound expensive, but I am sure there are plenty of you listening to this podcast right now wishing that it were that cheap. Mid-level competitive soccer league teams can add up total expenses to about $6,000 annually, with elite youth leagues racking up a total of $15,000 per child per year. With the high percentage of parents who think their child could be an Olympian, or at the very least want to use their child's membership in an elite sports club as bragging rights and a status symbol, of course investment groups are going to follow the trend. Can you really put a price on raising an Olympian? Yes, you can. And private equity is taking notes. It's like the peer pressure to smoke in high school, but now it's dance moms with bedazzled jackets telling you everyone who's anyone is on the hyper elite dance team. So, elite youth sports. Good, bad, ugly? What to think of the push towards elite youth sports and early sports specialization? Is this a positive, albeit expensive trend that's helping our kids be the best they can be at something they love? Is this a way out of generational poverty and into a free ride for a bachelor's degree? Or are we pouring a lot of time and money into greedy sports machine that is going to leave our kids injured and burned out? This is a delicate topic for a lot of families, both for those who choose elite youth sports and those who don't. And the pressure to specialize young is intense. There are a lot, like I discussed, a lot of not unreal threats of being left out in the future. My goal is to provide the data, discuss the risks and the benefits of elite youth sports and early sports specialization, and give a little wiggle room for families to decide what's best for them. I'll be using the term elite broadly, but think in this series, in this podcast, of elite as any intensity beyond community ed and rec league. Think year-round and early sports specialization, cross-country travel for games, politics, angry parents, a lot of money, intensive camps, private lessons with former pros, true Olympic hopefuls, and the kids that coaches tell parents could become Olympic hopefuls if they just spent more time and more money. As typical for this Substack, and this podcast, I will bridge the medical evidence in with our Catholic faith and our vocations as children of God, and for many of us as spouses and as parents. And I'll try my darn hardest to make this maybe a little funny, certainly kind, and not overwhelming. My impetus, like I discussed, for writing this article was twofold. Our friends and ourselves are all feeling that squeeze and pressure of elite youth sports. Some of us choosing to go that direction, some of us kind of trepidatiously declining. And providers are seeing a lot of overuse injuries in clinic related to hours and hours a week of repetitious single sport activities on young bodies. And I was curious, like I said, is this just a fluke or is this a trend? And is there data to back up what I was seeing? Now we're going to jump into part 2, the risk. Wear and tear. Sports-related injuries are the bread and butter of pediatric clinics. And as a pediatric PA, I do often congratulate the kiddos in the clinic room who have a sport-related injury. They found a sport they love, they're staying active, and occasional injuries will happen and aren't necessarily related to hyper-intense training. And look, one time I sprained my finger while I was hurdling, and that was not an overuse injury. That was just confusing. I don't even remember how I did it. I just remember that I did because I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. I run. How did I sprain a finger? But elite youth sports are a totally different ballgame, and you can roll your eyes because pun was intended there. Kids playing a year-round sport put repetitive stresses on developing bones, developing ligaments and muscles, and they may be playing aggressively and doing skills that are not developmentally appropriate for their age and their body. At baseline, children in club sports have more injuries than non-club athletes. Unsurprisingly, kids have more injuries with increased playing time at an intense level of competition when compared to free play. Sports specialization is associated with an increased risk for injuries, and high school athletes who specialize in a single sport are 70% more likely to have an injury than the students who played multiple sports. So it's really playing multiple sports puts you at lower risk for having an injury. A child may be doing great as an elite preteen softballer, but as they put greater risk on their body over the years, they may find themselves unable to keep playing a sport at such an intense level and a sport that they love so much. One study showed that 20% of highly competitive athletes listed injury as the reason for quitting their sport. Year-round training without a break shouldn't be the new norm for kids. Even at the collegiate level, our coaches stressed cross-training. And in season, we had 1 day a week where we swam instead of ran and would do a pool workout. And then after outdoor season finished, I did virtually no running for at least a month. And instead, I biked and swam, played volleyball. And think of any favorite professional athlete that you might have. They too have down seasons. And I try to remain as objective as I can, but truly I'm aghast at hearing about these incessant single sport practices without breaks in these young developing bodies. As we talked about, there are very real mental health benefits to youth sports, and those benefits do extend to the high-level athletes. However, adolescents who specialized in a sport reported greater levels of physiological burnout compared to athletes who didn't specialize. And these symptoms included a reduced sense of accomplishment, sport devaluation, and exhaustion. Adolescent athletes deserve as much attention to their minds as they do to their growing bones. I also want to talk about abuse. And abuse, emotional, sexual, physical, can happen anywhere at any time by anyone. And, I'm a Catholic. The heartbreak of abuse in our church is certainly not new. And the good news, though, is that there are ways to mitigate risk. And I do not say this to fearmonger, but to alert. Competing at an elite level, specializing in a sport, and having increased hours of weekly sports participation are all known risk factors for abuse. The U.S. Center for Safe Sport, which was created by Congress after it was revealed that a pedophile doctor abused child gymnasts for years, detailed factors in elite youth sports and early sports specialization that lead to abuse. Practices are long. They're at random times of the day. Think like early before school, late into the evening. And often these are times when very few kind of outside adults are present to witness practices. Club sports tend to be tight-knit communities where coaches and mentors and organizers are kind of all in the cahoots together. And this can lead to ostracization for athletes if they speak up about abuse concerns. Often, the child has been training with the same team and coaches for years, which creates a strong sense of loyalty and can prevent reporting abuse. After years of training in a small community, think like the same gymnastics gym with the same coach for 15 years, athletes and their parents can just think things are normal. This is how elite athletes are trained. This is just how things are done. The coach must yell at their athletes and call them idiots, because how else are you going to get perfection? The runners have to sprint injured because our competition is getting faster every day. The diets must be insane, and the comments on body shape must be said, because how else are those figure skating jumps going to be so high? Add to all of this that we are talking about children who may be fearful about speaking up to adults, or who may not even recognize that what is being done to them is abusive. Parents enrolling their children into elite sports may not have the experience of competing at a high level themselves. Many are following the guidance of society, coaches, they're begging kids to keep moving up to a greater level of intensity and training. And I need to pause and emphasize that this is not bad in itself. So pursuit of excellence is good. There are a lot of really, really good people in the world of sport. There are also a lot of icky people who get their kicks dominating U10 soccer leagues. My purpose isn't to make you creeped out by the prospect of creepy people, but just to be as present and aware as you possibly can be. I've heard many stories of abuse and inappropriate behavior on traveling club teams and school teams and college teams, professional teams. Recently, I read autobiographies by runners Kara Goucher and Mary Cain, both of whom ran under the now disgraced coach Alberto Salazar with the Nike Oregon Project. They detail their stories of abuse under a coach who was treated practically like a god. Cain trained with Salazar as both a minor and an adult, and Goucher only as an adult. And in both cases, they talk about how they didn't recognize quite that what was happening was abuse at the time. And given the increased risk for abuse with early sports specialization and elite level sports, I share all of this because I want to emphasize that abuse does not always look like abuse to those in the midst of it. Often, especially in sports, it looks like the way winners are made, and that's the way that it's pushed out. And so I just want to be really clear here. There are ways to mitigate this risk. I'm going to include some at the end of this podcast, and I'll also put some in the show notes and links to the Substack where I have posted that. So that will be coming, and we'll talk about ways to mitigate the risk in a little bit here. I also want to talk a little bit about faith and our identity, and the risks that these hyper elite sports can pose to that. Reverend Joshua Whitfield wrote a really excellent article for America Magazine titled Soccer versus Sunday Mass: How Youth Sports Are Undermining Religion and Hurting Our Kids. I'll link to that again in the show notes. It's really great. I do recommend reading it. And perhaps if you've read it, your favorite quote was the same as mine. He writes, "The Romans went about it all wrong. If they wanted to wipe Christians off the face of the earth, they didn't need to arrest them or try them, persecute or kill them. Better something else. Better to have made a spectacle for them than of them. Perhaps if the ancients weren't so bloodthirsty, they would have understood better the power of distraction over destruction. Would early Christianity have survived the cultural allure and power of today's youth sports? I'm not sure." Wow. And I'll add, is current American Christianity surviving youth sports? I'm not sure. And I say this tongue in cheek, but if in 10 years we find out that some foreign government used funding youth club sports to distract the citizens of the United States, would we be totally surprised given how all-consuming the youth sports culture has become? It's incredibly frustrating. And as a parent, as having lots of friends who've said this, it's so frustrating that the sports culture, the sports schedules, they're piled onto weekends, especially on Sundays. And youth sports are such a money-making machine that kids who want to be in sports have limited options outside of selling their soul to wear a softball jersey. And I acknowledge that I am very fortunate to live in an area where I could pick a time at all hours between Saturday afternoon to Sunday evening to go to Mass in my area. I'm also lucky my kids aren't begging to be in the competitive leagues yet, and I know that I could be reading this and listening to this in a few years. You don't even know. It's so much harder. But I also come from a world of sport and living mission through sport, and I'm passionate that sports can be both good for our souls and can destroy us at the same time. Sports are so good for our children. They're so alluring. But how slyly the devil works in parents' hearts to have us say so casually, "We don't go to Mass during baseball season. It's too busy. We have games." What kind of message does that send to our children? We are perfectly comfortable making an idol of sport because that's what the culture has told us is good and pleasing. We can talk about Jesus and do a team Bible study and pray before games, but if we're skipping church for basketball, we're showing our kids that if there is ever a choice between sport and God, sport wins. We didn't kill anyone. We didn't use the name of God in vain. We didn't cheat on our spouse, and yet we've possibly just committed repeat mortal sins by missing Mass on the Sabbath and putting false idols before our King. Yes, priests can give Mass exemptions in extraordinary circumstances, and we can certainly enjoy things of this world without idolization. I don't know your soul, and I'm certainly in no position to pass any judgment. What I do know is that sin is real, the devil is real, and he'll use anything he can, as innocent as it seems, to distract us from heaven. I would be failing my varsity Catholic training if I wrote some emotionally pleasing platitude like, God sees our hearts and knows we love him. We don't have to worship him and at church, and it's okay if you put him on, on the back burner when soccer season gets busy. Because it's true, God does see our hearts and he knows we love him. And he has made it very clear through his scripture and his commandments that our bums had better be in the pew come Sunday, and we had better not be putting false idols before him. He's obsessively loving like that. He wants all of us, not just the parts of our heart that seek him when it's convenient. Consider all of the informal ways that our faith is passed down through family mealtimes, prayers before bed, summer nights on the porch, praying rosaries of the family, and I'm like internally laughing at myself at, the family rosaries in our family are occasional and interrupted. Like, we have very ornery children sometimes. Regardless, these are all good things that bind our family together, and chaotic sports schedules interrupt all of it. All those beautiful things can still happen, but it's much harder. God may absolutely be calling you to a crazy life of drop-offs and pickups and dinner in the car, and I'll admit that those car conversations, one place to another, are some of the best that I have with my kids. But if mom and dad are ships in the night because dad needs to travel to Texas for baseball with their youngest, and mom needs to bring sisters and her friends to California for gymnastics, and big brother needs to be in Hawaii for a special training and forgot his socks, we are now all in the middle of a school math problem that no one can solve. Family life, especially as Catholics with between none to 1,000 children, is tiring as it is. Are we showing kids that their desires get to run the entire family schedule? Is God calling us to navigate a Tetris-like schedule every week? Maybe. And maybe not. There's so much stress put on families with elite team politics between all the money and the perceived high stakes. Again, maybe this is where God is calling us to spend our time. He could be asking for a voice of truth amid Zoom calls with the coach and angry parents upset that their kid isn't getting playing time. But how much discord does deciding to change teams last minute or add a new player or concerns surrounding a coach's style bring to what should be healthy, leisure, family time? Also looking at the financial aspect of things, elite youth sports, these camps, private lessons, they're far from affordable for most families. And as discussed, it's such a money-making racket that private equity firms want a piece of that youth sports pie. We're called to be prayerful financial stewards of the resources God has given us. And I kind of want to vomit thinking about how much debt families may go into for a child's sport, or how much good that the money currently being poured into clubs, leagues by the large donors could do for access to sport and the creation of safe, open spaces for kids to play. Again, the discernment of finances is between you and God, and I can think of plenty of instances where that monetary cost is worth it. And something else to think about is what happens when the competitive, year-round, elite, specialized sport ends. Because it will. Whether it's before graduation or after an Olympic gold, eventually our bodies grow old and we won't be able to run as fast or play as hard. Though I will be the first to admit that I am delusional because, what if the marathon is really my event and I just haven't run one yet? And what if I could qualify for the Olympic trials? We can absolutely raise our children to find their identity in God, to offer their workouts as prayer, to know we love them regardless of the outcome. Anyone can be at risk to lose their identity in something other than God. They don't have to be an elite athlete. However, the pressure, money, and time these kids and their families empty into their sport adds another layer of burden when or if a child decides they want to step back from their sport. Who are they without their sport, if every waking hour of the family was devoted to a singular goal? Who are they if they're injured, burned out, abused? Will they be forthcoming with their struggles, or will they crumble under the burden of the enormous sacrifices they and their parents have made? And as we add this all up, pressure is a privilege, and encouraging children with the values of hard work and perseverance are worth our investment. At the same time, I want to be sure our youngest of athletes feel free to learn and grow and move within environments that are challenging and appropriate and fun for them. There are very real physical, emotion, and potential abuse risks to elite youth sports and early specialization, and I don't think that it's too off base to suggest that there are questions regarding eternity that need to be asked as well. We're left with that question, though, still hanging in the air. Are these risks worth it? Do elite sports help reach the goals of athletes and their families? So now we are in part 3 of my series, The Reward? Question mark. So do elite sports and sports specialization young actually predict long-term success? So from a purely athletic point, I was curious to see if elite youth sports and early sports specialization actually result in playing collegiately or professionally. And interestingly, the data shows that for most sports, children benefit physiologically and athletically if they wait later in life to specialize. There are some outliers that are worth mentioning. So athletes in individual sports like gymnastics, dance, swimming, and tennis do tend to specialize earlier. Overall, though, when it comes to sports specialization, the data is clear. Play a variety of sports for as long as you can. World-class athletes often didn't specialize before age 13 and instead competed in many different sports. Growing up, these elite athletes gained valuable playing time in unstructured activities, so playing for fun. In one study of NCAA DI athletes, 45% played multiple sports until the age of 16 years old. Even the individual sport athletes that became NCAA D1 athletes didn't specialize until the age of 14. Another study looked at this age of sport specialization in youth, comparing D1 athletes to their non-athlete college peers. So they're looking at the group of athletes in college versus the kids who were in college but not athletes for the school. It was the non-athletes who specialized earlier in sports. So there's this pool of kids who specialized early and then went to college and nothing became of that. They didn't continue their sport on in college. There are a lot of percentages and statistics thrown out, mostly by me in this post. Like 11% of parents think that their kids can be a professional athlete. The odds are not that. Like, bluntly, they're not that. Let's use high school boys basketball as an example. There are currently 540,704 high school boys basketball players currently. The chance of playing in any division of the NCAA for boys basketball, men's basketball, is 3.6%. So 1.1% D1 and D2 each, and then 1.5% D3. Of all NCAA basketball players, 1% of those will be drafted into the NBA. To put this in perspective, of all the 540,000 plus U.S. high school boys basketball players playing currently, only 54 of them will go pro. A lot of people might be thinking, well, why not my child? And I too think, why not your child? There's so much that goes into the formation of an elite athlete. And a not exhaustive list includes their coaches, the child's desire to play, the financial support, the time that a kiddo has to play, their genetics, their muscle composition, their ability to stay injury-free or at least career-ending injury-free, mental health, proper diet, adequate sleep, work ethic, teams available in the area, decent teammates and competition, the reputation of the team, which college scouts see a kid play, and a dash of pixie dust and luck. And specifically speaking on the genetics component, this matters. And maybe we're not wanting to talk about it as much in like these youth sport leagues, but this matters. D1 athletes are more likely to have parents who played either collegiately or professionally compared to their non-athlete collegiate peers. My parents were not college athletes, and I like to think that I just kind of fell into hurdling because it was fun and something that I loved. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that my first pair of sprinting spikes were my cousin's, and she won state in the 100-meter hurdles. And then she went on to be a collegiate runner and a swimmer, and she was an NCAA champion for swimming and then went to the Olympic trials for swimming. My grandfather hurdled. When I ran at Drake Relays, my dad told me that a few generations back, another relative of mine had hurdled there. I'm part of a long lineage of long-legged folk. What may have been a fun choice as a 7th grader was predestined by my genetics. And this is probably going to be incredibly niche, and some of you are going to be rolling your eyes. But in the back of my mind, I'm hearing Miranda Priestley from The Devil Wears Prada saying to me, like, oh, I see. You think this has nothing to do with you. You think you chose hurdling because you thought it was fun. However, hurdling represents generations of runners, and it's sort of comical how you think you've made a choice that exempts you from your genetics when in fact you're doing a sport that was selected for you by the ancestors on your family tree. You should all watch The Devil Wears Prada. It's really good. I just made myself sound super cheesy there, so you should all go at least watch it for me. Okay. At the end of the day, a child becoming a professional athlete is totally possible. But if you look out at a court of high school basketball players, even those who just really love playing, only 1 out of 100 are going to go D1. I say that practically, statistically, medically. That doesn't mean your child won't. It's just the way that the maths. We all know kids and friends who have made it big. It's nowhere near impossible. We just need to make sure that we're carrying perspective in with us. So where does this leave us practically? From a strictly data-driven viewpoint, I would advise parents to think of a year-round baseball league for their 9-year-old as more of a short-term performance boost instead of a long-term plan. Early specialization and elite level playing increase the risk for abuse, injury, and burnout, and the likelihood of becoming a world-class athlete decreases. There are outliers in everything, and I don't know your family, I don't know your children. However, as a PA, I'm trained in evidence-based medicine. While I try to tailor my advice to patients as individuals, I can't avoid the piles of papers arguing against early sport specialization. I empathize deeply with parents trying to make the best decision for their kids, especially with outward pressure, recommending private lessons, a special training session, another camp, or a coach growing annoyed at the recovery time for a concussion. Here is the warm, beautiful truth. In most cases, no one cares more about a child's long-term physical and mental health than the child's parents. Not coaches, not teammates, not college recruiters. At the end of the day, anyone making money in the sports world has quotas to fill and games to win and a job to keep. Short-term success gained by pounding out hours on the pitching mound may benefit the team this year, but will your son need Tommy John surgery on his UCL a few years down the line because he threw too much on a developing elbow? Before I go on, I do want to say on the record that there are so many good coaches and people in the sports world. Thank you so much to all the kind leaders out there. I have been abundantly blessed by some really excellent coaches who taught me not only in sport, but were just great mentors. One of my coaches literally saved my life and drove me for hours across rural South Dakota to get to a major medical center while I was in kidney failure after a race. And I had to go to the ER in this small little town. I had an IV still jammed into my arm. I was like gripped on to this pillow trying not to throw up as my coach rushed me to a big hospital system. I'm not arguing that your coach doesn't care about your kiddo. In fact, I hope so much that their coach is excellent and is a trustworthy source of information and guidance. I just want to encourage parents to feel empowered to make the decisions that they feel are best for their child. I'm hoping these kids will get to play the sport they love for life, not just for a few years. It's hard out there, and there can be a lot of not unrealistic fears of kids being left behind and not being in the leagues that everyone else is, and especially as high schools cherry pick from these feeder elite youth teams. I don't know what decisions my family will make in the coming years, and I'm curious to see how demographics shift, if they shift, in the NCAA and beyond, as graduates of these hyper-intense youth sports make their way into the collegiate and professional sports world. Even with this movement, though, I'm still hesitant to say that we will see more elite adult players specialize early. The risks for injury and burnout will still drive a lot of would-be really great athletes to leave their sport, potentially prematurely, even with the current climate of needing to be in elite clubs just to make it on the school ball teams. If I were a betting woman, and I'm not, I take like $20 in cash with me to the casino and call it good, I'd bet that us pediatric providers will see an increase in overuse injuries, hopefully not, but potentially sports career-ending injuries and burnout in the coming years. I also want to revisit that faith aspect as well. I would say that most parents taking their Catholic faith with any level of seriousness kind of move through the world with their eyes heavenward. All the statistics and the studies matter, but at the end of the day, the question is, do elite sports help form our children into saints? And this is obviously not a question that I'm going to be able to answer for anyone else besides maybe my own family. And even then, it's one that I'll be reevaluating over the coming years. Certainly, we are called to achieve the greatness God places on our hearts. We are given the gift of friendship with God, knowledge of our children and their hearts. We know the ways that our family operates best. We have the discernment of spirits, and we have holy spiritual guides there to help us make that decision. As we think about this, like forming kids into saints, there is a really wonderful group in the Denver area where we live that has been doing this sport and sainthood just so incredibly well. And I want to share it as an alternative, maybe as something that people in other areas can implement. And this is not an advertisement. They have no idea that I'm doing this. The owners have no idea who I am. I've just been so impressed by what they've done. So it's called Highlight Catholic Ministries. Like I said, they're in the Denver area, and they have two branches, Frassati and Badano Sports, so men's and women's respectively. They offer camps, clinics, in-house leagues, and leagues that play citywide in the Catholic Schools Athletic League, as well as against other leagues. And these teams also have like a homeschool league, so kids can still play team sports while homeschooled. These sports, like camps, everything includes prayer, testimony of saints, encouragement to seek God's glory, and it's just all integrated seamlessly into practices and games. The prices are affordable. A lot of the coaches are volunteer. This exact model may not, be feasible for certain areas. I think of where I come from, a very small rural town. I was practically the lone Catholic in a sea of Lutheran kids. We could do a all Christian league. I mean, I've been so impressed by the sports we've done, like I said, though, through this league. And my daughter has come home from the tennis camp every day this week, excited to share a new story of a saint who loved Jesus through strength and sport. So just an alternative option. It's possible. And then this is a perfect segue into Pope Leo XIV and his June intention. So if you've made it this far, you probably don't need this reminder, but I'm going to give it anyways. This series and this episode specifically focused on the elite youth sports culture as well as early sports specialization. I'm still a huge fan of sport. When it comes to the hard decisions in sports and life, I often remind myself that we were never promised it would be easy this side of heaven. As an athlete, I get excited about that. Give me a challenge and I will rise to it, coach. As a parent, my kids aren't in any elite leagues, but they have played many rec league sports. And sure, registration can be a headache. My daughter never learned to swim even with private lessons at our local recreation center, and I'm not sure she knows to not guard her own team in basketball. But we are having so much fun. We're making friends and we're learning virtue. Praise God. I'll end with Pope Leo's video message that went along with his intention for the month of June. Sport. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord of life, we thank you for the gift of sport, for those who glorify God through the exercise of their bodies, for the friendships born on the field, and the joy of playing as a team. You teach us that in life, as in the game, no one is saved alone. We need others to grow, to learn respect, to overcome our limits, and to celebrate together the victories we achieve. We ask that sport may always be a school of fraternity, not of empty rivalry, a space of encounter, not exclusion, a path of peace, not violence. May those who play, train, or cheer discover in a sport a universal language that brings cultures together, unites people, and sows respect, solidarity, and personal growth. Lord Jesus, may every sport become a parable of life lived with you, working with joy and effort, living with humility in defeat, and with gratitude in the victory you offer in your resurrection. May your Spirit never be lacking on us, making us one team united with you to build communion and fraternity in history. Amen. This is what sport can do. Consider the unifying delight that it has been watching America host the FIFA World Cup this summer, deep in the midst of the United States taking off like every nation politically in the world. Norwegians are here doing the Viking row on the floor of New York subways. Scots in kilts are singing along to bagpipes in Boston. The French are discovering just how great air conditioning is. I reminisce too on the Olympics that were earlier this year. Athletes competed next to allies and their quote-unquote enemies Athletes represented themselves individually because they come from war-torn countries. The US of A kicked old Canada's behind back to the frigid north, and all the heroic stories of redemption and love and families supporting each other. Sports are something that can rally us, encourage us to be more than we ever thought possible, and honor God. I pray we each pursue God's will for us, and whether that's on a fancy international soccer team or kicking a ball in the backyard. Saint Sebastian, patron of sports, pray for us. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. I hope that this really helped form some of your decisions as you think about for your family, maybe for your patients. I hope that it strengthened your resolve and your love for the Lord. This series, when I originally wrote it for Substack, was an absolute delight. It combined my 3 favorite loves: faith, sport, and of course medicine. So it was super fun to put all of that together, and then to be able to come on and share that on the podcast. I mean, this is everything I love. I love this so much. So I will link in the show notes to each of the posts. So like I said, this was divided into 3 different parts. And when you click on those individual posts, you'll be able to see all the references and the studies that I've linked, the articles that I discussed can all be found in those individual posts. And then, as I mentioned, if you may be already watching this on Substack, but we do have a Substack that you can check out. The link to that will also be in the show notes, as will the link to our website, practicingcatholicmedicine.com. Our Instagram is just at Practicing Catholic Medicine. I post updates on there. That's probably like the most consistently updated page. So I would really encourage, and I would love if you would follow us on Instagram. I love getting to talk with all of you and hearing more about what you're interested in, how things have been going, ways I can pray for you. I always intended for this to be a community. And so it's really, really fun to be able to talk with you guys on Instagram and hear more. And I will also update all of this on YouTube too. I, as promised, discussed that I'll talk about kind of how to prevent abuse in sport and in elite youth sports. I'll include this link as well in the show notes, but the American Academy of Pediatrics on their Healthy Children site provided some really great recommendations for creating a safe space. These are just a few of the key points from that, but like I said, I will include a link so you can see more about how to prevent abuse in sport. It's something that I'm super passionate about. So here's a few key points. First, all adults should be trained on recognizing abusive behavior and appropriate and non-abusive training methods. And there must be a code of conduct policy explicitly stating the organization's expectations for athletes and adults. And everyone should be familiar with what is considered motivational coaching behavior and training methods versus what crosses the line to physical and emotional abuse. This is harder than it may seem. Like I said, my coach was let go for abuse years later, and I saw the reasons, and I was like, I thought that's just what they did in elite sports. So not only is this abuse rampant and common, but it can be really hard to recognize. Both youth and adults should know how to report. So that's really important. And there should be no direct communication via phone, text, or social media from adults to a youth athlete, but rather parents should be involved in all communication. And I say this knowing instances where that has been a problem. So to be clear, I don't really care the situation, but the adult coach should never be texting a minor without also including the parent. Any private training should be in a highly visible location, preferably with other adults nearby. All youth must travel with a parent, not alone, not with a coach, and parents should have detailed travel plans, and training facilities should provide athletes with adequate privacy and security. So those are just some of them, some of the tips to be able to mitigate abuse in sport. Praying for y'all. I know that's kind of a hard note to end on, but it's one that like I said, if I can encourage you in the sense that I think that in these coming years, we're going to be able to recognize abuse and stop it, hopefully before it ever starts, a lot better than we ever have. So I know that this is something that kids and athletes are becoming more aware of, parents are becoming more aware of. I think that we're going to see a lot of positive changes. So I do want to end on that positive note that like the steps that need to be taken are being taken. As always, with this podcast, the views that I discuss are not necessarily those of my employer. And my Substack, my podcast, my YouTube, all of our social media platforms and website are not meant or intended to replace medical advice from a licensed provider. Please see your healthcare provider for any medical concerns. Again, I'm so excited to be here. Just so excited to be back talking with you all. You all will be in my prayers. Have a great rest of your summer. I hope you stay safe, healthy, and ready to go back to school, which is unfortunately coming up so much faster than I'm ready for. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful day and take care.